As always, thank you all for joining and listening and being a part of the Too Much community. The workbook, the Too Much Workbook, Tools to Build a Life That You Love, is live. You can purchase at deniselovehewitt.com. You can get it at any of the links in my bio. This has been a labor of love built out of my journey of redesigning my life. So I created this 40-page workbook to help you figure out what your blueprint is for your life, not what society tells you to be, not what you thought you should be, really what your soul is here to do, and to figure out how to design a life that's going to bring you a lot of meaning in a really challenging professional landscape. So please check it out. I really appreciate all of you for tuning in, being a part of this journey, and I hope it brings you an immense amount of value.
Is there such a thing as too much luck? Is there such a thing as too much fun? Messing around, wondering how it's taken so long. I'm really so strong. It's not too much at all.
Morning, everybody, or afternoon, or evening, and who knows when you're listening to this, but on a morning drive to work is how I envision you. This week, we're back at it. We're back at my favorite topic of ambition. I have the brilliant Brooke Taylor here with me today. Hi, Brooke.
Hi, so happy to be here with you.
And I'm going to tell you about Brooke. Brooke has an incredible book called Healing the Success Wound that comes out this week. Let me tell you about Brooke and why I loved her book so much and why I had to have her on the pod. Brooke Taylor is a globally recognized transformational career coach, keynote speaker, and the leading authority on a phenomenon she pioneered known as the success wound, which many listeners, I know, we have this. With a career that began in the high pressure hallways of Silicon Valley, Brooke spent years as a marketing lead at Google, where she was honored with the Google Global Sales Award. Despite her outward accolades, she experienced firsthand the manic ambition and burnout that often plague high achievers, leading her to profound personal transformation and the eventual founding of her coaching practice. Today, Brooke is a secret weapon for executive women at the world's most influential firms, including Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, Uber, Salesforce, Coinbase, and Meta. She's helped over 5,000 leaders decouple their self-worth from their achievements, allowing them to trade chronic burnout and workplace anxiety for a career rooted in deep fulfillment and sustainable power. Brooke is currently prepared for the release of her highly anticipated first book, Healing the Success Wound, which comes out this week, which serves as a definitive guide for women to reclaim their identities from the success wound. Yay!
Yay, thank you for that. I mean, as you're talking about that, I'm like, is this like hitting on my success wound? But I was like, no, I'm really proud of that and the mission and everything it's taken to get here. So thanks for reading that.
Yeah, well, I think that it's not about hitting the success wound. It's the journey that helps us reevaluate our lives to a more sustainable place. And we don't get
Mhm.
there. You don't get there if life is working for you. Most transformation happens when life is not working for you.
Yes. Pain is absolutely the touchstone of spiritual growth in my experience, for better or
Yeah.
for worse.
Totally. So you define the success wound as the false belief that your worthiness of love and belonging is contingent upon what you produce, achieve, or do, rather than the inherent goodness of who you are. And I concur with this definition, but how did you decide that was the eternal definition of the success wound?
Good question. When I was doing the research and diving into a survey that I conducted with over 5,000 women, they all had three things in common. The first is that they had a childhood experience where they learned that the more that they achieved or lived up to a cultural or familial definition of goodness, the more love and approval and belonging they would have. And love, approval, and belonging are those kind of core needs that we have as kids and certainly as adults. The absence of love and belonging is what causes shame. So I think the success wound is at its core like a shame wound, right? Because it's like, what are my coping mechanisms that I use in order to feel like I am enough to prop up my identity and to create a shield against potentially feeling embarrassed, hurt, seen as incompetent, etc. So I chose those words very intentionally because of both the childhood root, but also I guess, its habit in terms of us avoiding shame in our lives.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. And how does the success wound differ from imposter syndrome or perfectionism? These are all always conflated together, and you do a really good job of starting to create distinctions in the language for us in terms of success and ambition and why this is different than those things.
Yeah, so I would be in coaching sessions and people would say something along the lines of like, no matter how much I achieve, it never really feels like enough. Or, I'm only as good as my last piece of feedback. Or if I'm not the best, then what's the point? And I would ask them, they would say things to me like, oh, that's just my imposter syndrome talking, or that's my perfectionism talking. And as I dug deeper, underneath all of that was the habit of tying outcomes of success, productivity, achievement to their value as a person. And that's then what caused the habit of wanting to compulsively perfect every last detail so people didn't show up as incompetent, or it produced the phenomenon or the experience of doubting one's expertise in a room despite all of the resume or experience that they possibly had. So this underlying habit of tying what we do to who we are is what causes imposter syndrome and what causes perfectionism. And I think it's important to realize that, because so often in so much of like professional development literature or self-help work, we're taught to kind of use these kind of simple tips and tricks to avoid your imposter syndrome or to reframe your perfectionism, but nobody's actually like named the real root of these things.
So it's like the disease is the success wound, and the symptoms are perfectionism or imposter syndrome. When we talk about systems work, a lot of what we look at on this podcast is like in society, we're sort of always talking about these band aid solutions. We're not really talking about the root or the system that is creating that in people, and to heal what we want to heal societally and move into this, in my dreams, a happier collective future is being able to name the root and not just say, okay, these symptoms, like you said, these habits that are this. It's like, no, actually, let's get to the core of this. We'll eradicate those habits so we can feel like we have more agency in our lives.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And in a lot of ways, the success wound is a bit of a misnomer because the word wound implies that it's like we're broken or hurt, when in reality, it's the culture that's broken
Yeah.
and that causes the hurt within us. So our success wound isn't our fault, but healing it is our responsibility. And I think you and I both agree that so much of this kind of larger cultural change can start with an inner shift in how we choose to see our worth and our work as separate from each other.
We'll come back to the culture later, but I want to give people a little bit more color because you do such a great job
Mhm.
of explaining things in the book about this. So I want to
Mhm.
read something that Brooke so kindly puts in the book. She talks about the paradox of the unfulfilled achiever, which is that the well intentioned strategies that were once used to get ahead, to win others over, and to achieve are often the very things keeping you from the next level of success and from fulfillment that lasts longer than a few days. Eventually, the very strategies that helped you rise begin to hold you back. And this is so at the crux of so much as we get so dependent on these coping mechanisms because they've helped us achieve so much that the idea of changing our relationship to our work feels so scary. Especially like, for me, my startup failed. I had to change how I worked. There was a clear stop, there was a clear ending. But for most people, like, a lot of my friends who are in corporate America, who are very successful, who've gotten to a certain place because of those coping mechanisms, they feel a little unfulfilled. They feel like something's not working in their lives, but it's working enough. And that
Mhm.
gap to cross from, okay, it's working enough, but it could work way better. I am successful in spite of these bad coping
Yeah.
mechanisms. And if I got rid of that interference, maybe my life be 10x more successful. But I'm successful enough that it's scarier to get out of the comfort zone. Like I was brought to my knees, I had to change how I work. So it's
Yeah.
very easy for me to sit here and say, I've changed my life. My life is so much better. But I was forced to. Whereas people who aren't forced to, how do we get them to see that actually the things that made you successful now are maybe not working in the same way, that there's a new way to work that will allow you not only to keep succeeding, but to feel more at peace.
Mhm. Yeah, you said it. I feel we all have a friend like this, right? Like the friend who has been repeating the same kind of like mild to moderate patterns for the last 10 to 15 years. And you're like, girl, if you could stop circling the drain and just like hit bottom and get to enough pain, then you would actually change your habits. But so many people exist, especially in the workplace, in this like mild to moderate dissatisfaction. And they just think, oh, this is work. This is how work is. This is what's
Yeah.
required in order to get ahead. Like, this is just the price of admission.
Mhm.
And I have two answers to that. One, on the one hand, if that's you who's listening, I can't convince you that there's like another way of doing things, right? Like think there has to be like that. I can't deprive somebody of their bottom. I think somebody kind of has to hit their knees in some way and be like, I want to change how I'm working. But if I had like a soapbox and I could stare at somebody and try to convince them of something, this is probably what I would say. I would say, if you have existed in your career and in your ways of working in a way that feel like it's Groundhog Day, you're repeating the same thing over and over again, and you're not feeling or sensing any sort of progress, that's how you know that there's a toxic pattern or wound underneath that you've been avoiding. And our ambition only has two power sources. Unlike the lamp in our rooms that can plug into any outlet, our ambition only can plug into two places. The first is our success wound. So our ambition can be powered by fear, scarcity, and need to prove. Or it can be plugged into another part of our psyche that's called the true self, the part of us that is naturally confident, clear, capable, present, persistent, has great perspective. And when you're working from that place, you can enter into a state of flow. You can have more creative ideas. You can respond instead of react. You don't have anxiety before you go to bed. And so my goal is to help my clients work 51% of the time from their true self, at best. And I think you only can know what that feels like if you experiment with it. And so that would be my greatest wish for anyone. But do you agree with what I'm saying? Like, you can't convince somebody of this unless you hit your knees in
No,
some
this is
way.
why I can't be a therapist. I don't have the patience because I'd be like, we're looping, we're on the same record, we're playing the same record. Can we like move on? Because I'm
I
such
know.
like a pattern person that when I see patterns in myself, I'm like, we gotta stop the pattern. I get really sick of like my
I know.
bullshit, like,
I know.
but some of us don't get sick of our own bullshit. We really only
Totally.
change when we get sick of it. And so that's the part where like, thank God people like you are coaches because you have the patience to give people the pathways and nothing has to be like change is slow. Like real enduring change is not quick. And so you don't
Yeah.
change how you work overnight. And still to this day, I think you and I can speak to this and we'll probably talk about it more later, which is
Yeah.
I'm always going to have a success wound. It doesn't disappear. I just have a better relationship to the wound so I can see it more clearly and say, "You know what? I don't wanna go back to operating that way. I am gonna go
Yes.
right because I see myself doing the thing that I always do, which is using work as an avoidant tactic. I very easily can put that hat back on. The choice I have now is I have more awareness to pick which hat I'm gonna be in. Or when I see
Mm.
myself veering from, you say the true self, or in my language, we say alignment,
Hmm.
I have better tools in my kit to get myself back to that
That's right.
aligned true self place.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's why the book is called Healing the Success Wound rather than How to Heal the Success Wound. There was some debate about that. I was like, no, this is a ongoing work of a lifetime, especially in a capitalistic society. And I think that's exactly it. And somebody who's listening could maybe like look at me or you and be like, maybe this is just what I'm thinking, but I think it's an argument. It's like, oh, well, Brooke couldn't hack it at Google. And so that's why she's talking about this. Or, like if Denise's business hadn't failed, would she still have this perspective? And I genuinely do believe, and Denise and I have talked about this, it's like so many of us are talking this language now. And this is something that I was grappling with literally 10 years ago. And I know you've been grappling with for so long, that there is wisdom when there's a repetition of ideas, right? Like there's a reason why there's this severe reckoning around work right now. And I think everybody will be brought to their knees in some way. It might not just be now, but your time might come later on.
There's this truth that's revealing itself, like that Brooke, myself, if you watched Amina Altai's episode on here, we're all coming to the same conclusion individually. We've
Yeah.
happened now to come into a conversation, but we all came to a similar truth in isolation from each other. And that to
Hmm.
me tells me there's a kernel that's worth being nurtured. But also for me, I'm a lot happier than I was. So it's like I had a
Hmm.
lot of shiny jobs. I got all the things that I thought I wanted, and then I got there and I didn't want them. And
Yeah.
so It was maybe a shiny job title, but I wasn't loving the process, where I don't need the same level of shiny success as I did 10 years ago, because I'm happy every day in the work that I'm doing. And I
Mhm.
believe in the process and I'm fulfilled. And so when we talk about, sure, okay, maybe you couldn't hack it or maybe you failed, the reality is I'm fulfilled. I
Mhm.
enjoy my day to
Mhm.
day in a way that I didn't 10 years ago. So if you are enjoying your day to day, great for you. If you are not, if you are sitting there being like, my limiting belief is that no one really likes their job.
Right.
We all just work, or yeah, everyone has stuff at work they don't like. Everyone's getting, for me, it was a lot of like sexist comments at work, for you as well. I'm not interested in being in that environment. So how do I build a world in which I feel more seen and heard, where I feel more like I'm doing the thing that I'm here to do to help the collective as well as live in my purpose? And so that's really the answer. It's not about, we're going to talk about this. Like, success wound is also looking at shiny objects and thinking those are the things that matter most.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I learned more
You
from my failure than I did from my successes.
mm, yeah. Yeah. Oh, 100%. I'm just letting that comment land and thinking about my failures and successes. And yeah, that's totally true for sure. I've learned more about myself and what I'm capable of clawing my way out of dark times than I have continuing to hit goals and do great things, you know?
Yeah. And a lot of my work has also been to not, I really want people to feel this, like, failure is not a bad thing. It's just one chapter in the many chapters of your life. Like, if anything, like, failure is the reason I'm going to do better next time, and have more successes, largely
Mhm.
because I internalized a lot of major lessons that now inform a workflow that's much more sustainable than the workflow I used to have. So I really want to change the rhetoric around failure or any of that, because I think it's just a growth curve.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
not a
Mhm.
binary concept, and if anyone's reading Lena Dunham's book right now, I think she has a very interesting interpretation of failure, and publicly very much failing, and then
Yeah.
learning a lot about herself in the process. And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
the internal success is always the win.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. It's so true. It's so true.
You do this beautiful synthesis of psychological archetypes in your book. You have 5 archetypes you've created for us that interpret the success wound differently. Can you walk us through the archetypes?
Yeah. So these are the ways that the success wound can manifest in your work, in your life, in your family, etc. Typically, people tend to default to one or two, but it could be that you've exemplified these at different points in your career or different points of your day, or maybe in your 20s it was one way or in your 40s was another way. So I'll go through all of them, all 5. I'll tell you which one's most common. I'll tell you which one I am. And Denise, I'm curious where you default to now. So the first one is the grinder. This is the person who wants to have more, do more, be more. They get a high by crossing something off their to-do list. One of my clients who's a grinder called herself a shark without a resting state, one of those sharks that has to stay in motion in order to survive. This is somebody who defines their value based on the volume of their productivity, and they don't need to rest. For them, they almost like rest by continuing to work. The second person is the hider. This is actually the most common one. This is the person who plays it safe, maybe from the outside looks successful. You wouldn't be able to spot her in the wild necessarily, because she secretly harbors dreams about her career that she never fully realizes, because she doesn't want to be financially irresponsible. She doesn't want to be judged. She doesn't want to be embarrassed. She thinks other people can have great success, but not her. So she plays it safe, plays it in her comfort zone. The third one is the pleaser. This is somebody who is constantly wondering, are you mad at me? Are you mad at me? They're taking the emotional temperature of the room. They're wondering if a tone from their boss means that they're about to get fired, or if somebody doesn't like them, it feels like they're literally going to die. They get a sense of fulfillment and validation by keeping things kind of like agreeable and amenable, and they're constantly worried that if somebody's mad at them, that means that they're a failure in a way. Then we have the seeker. We all have a friend like this. This is somebody who spends their day on a spectrum of career confused to full-blown existential crisis, maybe all in the same day. They have purpose anxiety, so they're constantly wondering, like, when am I going to find my thing? Like, what's the thing that's finally going to complete me? And they tend to chase shiny objects. So whether it's a idea or a business plan, or they hop from job to job, or even hop from job to job in their head, they are restless, irritable, and discontent. Then we have the work hard, play hard. This is the final one. This is what I was when I was at Google in my 20s. This is the person who lives in extremes. They want to be booked and busy and do really well at their day job. And then they want to be extreme in how they vacation, party, numb out. So they are on that pain pleasure seesaw all the time, trying to kind of like balance the scales. Friday rolls around, they're like, I've worked so hard, I deserve this glass of wine or this expensive vacation, or to veg out for the rest of the weekend. And that's the work hard, play hard. So I earlier in my career was more of a work hard, play hard. Then early in my entrepreneurial life, I was a lot of a hider. Like, even though I had made this big leap in my career that might have looked big, I was still playing small because I was really scared of being vulnerable online, for example, or marketing myself. And now I'm more of like a grinder pleaser combo, which is really common, where it's like, I'm going to please you by how much I do, and I'm going to show you how good I am by how hard I'm working.
So I want to talk about that for a second because I'm definitely grinder pleaser combo, which I don't think I would call myself a people pleaser in the traditional sense. I don't really care about whether or not I'm liked, I guess is the best way to put it. But you will understand my value in your organization. Like for me, it was always like, you don't have to like me, but can you deny how competent and excellent my work is? Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think that's more of a grinder then. I think you want to be undeniable in how excellent you are and how high achieving, productive, how much you are the get shit done person. That's really the grinder.
Yeah, so definitely a grinder. And then the other one is the seeker, which then my other question about the seeker is that for people that are looking for purpose, and for me, I tried all these things, learned what I didn't like. Everything was information. So what I didn't like led me closer to something that I could like. I was trying all these different expressions of purpose on, but not quite finding it. And when I figured out what my sweet spot was, I didn't seek as much. Granted, that happened
Mhm.
post therapy and post a lot of work. But do we think that seekers are someone that's perpetually seeking, or have they just not found their thing yet?
That's a great question. I think the beauty and the strength of the seeker is literally in the seeking, the
Mm.
determination to find something that fits them. I think where the difference between somebody who seeks and never finds versus somebody who seeks and maybe finds a great combination of things is in their denying an inner restlessness that literally has nothing to do with their job. For example, I know somebody who's close to me and they have made probably, I think, like 8 career pivots in 10
Yeah.
years, and they just made another one. And when we asked them how their job is, they're like, it's fine.
Right.
And we could sense in that. And I just know this person's life. And I think there are so many other sources of discontentment that get projected onto the job. So when I switch the job, then you go through the cycle, kind of like if people tend to date a lot or switch partners, it's the high of
Right.
of the first 3 months. It's the disappointment when that thing isn't the thing. It's
Yeah.
then the wondering like, okay, should I switch again? And then it's the high of fantasy,
Yeah.
what could be next, right? Oh my God, what could be next? And then you obsess and you network and you think about it and then you do the move and that feels exciting. So you can feel the difference between those two. Yeah.
Okay, very helpful because I'm sure some people will be listening and being like, I'm just really actually just trying to find the thing I like. It's not to do
Yes.
with the, I guess, muscle or motion of seeking, but rather I just, have been disappointed in this work experience in a way that I don't like the actual nuts and bolts of the job. It doesn't speak to me. Let me pivot and see what are the nuts and bolts that I like. Because I do think
Right.
you learn so much from knowing what you do not like.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. And you're such a great example because you've crafted a career for yourself that express so many of your different interests and curiosities and scratch so many different creative or intellectual itches for yourself. Again, that's another difference where it's like, I need to find one thing that satisfies all these needs, as opposed to the medicine for the seeker, which you might have even seen, is this idea of like, I'm a creative. I get to
Yeah.
create what I want. I don't need to find something that will rescue me. I can create the
Right.
conditions that I want. And that's what you were able to do. You're not a victim, you were a creator.
Right. And I don't have to be one thing. And that's the biggest thing for seekers too, is if I had only developed my DJ career, for example, and never bothered to do the podcast and my writing, That's one part of me. It is not the whole of me. And I still would be seeking if I
Exactly.
had said that's everything that I do because it's not
Exactly.
enough for me, you know? And that's not a judgment on anybody who that's enough for. It's just that for me, I knew I needed this podcast as an intellectual pursuit in addition to DJing, which really helps me stay
Mhm.
flow and generative and more of an off switch for my brain. Those are important things for people. It's like
So
we
true.
don't have to
That's
be
so
one
true.
thing.
But I think that must have been such a journey for you as somebody who came from like a startup venture kind of corporate background where it really is, it's like niche, be the one thing, develop that one expertise, and that will take you far. As opposed to, again, I'm not an employee, I'm a creative. I can create what I want.
Yep. Well, I'll tell you this. It was interesting when things went south. One of my friends, who's also an entrepreneur, she said, you're so lucky you were DJing the whole time you had your startup. And I was like, why? She's like, because you had a different experience over here that was rewarded, that was positive. And if you had just had a startup that was flailing, it probably would have taken a bigger self-esteem hit than it did because you had this other
Mm.
thing that was like working, that was flow, that you enjoyed the process of. And I think that was a really good point because I had never thought about it like that because I've never been just one thing. But that's why it's important to also have hobbies or things that fill you up that aren't just your job because we don't get to control the variables
So
of our
true.
lives.
Yeah. I mean, when I'm coaching a seeker client or even a grinder client, part of the medicine is the fulfillment spillover effect, where it's like, how can we find fulfillment in other areas of our life to have a spillover into this other place and space? And I think, especially, well, certainly for boomers, but I feel like millennials are kind of like, for lack of a better word, not baby boomers, but you know what I'm saying, like an echo of that generation. We still kind of buy into some of the old ideas of career and success where it has to look a certain way. And I think decentering work and finding different creative ways to, I don't know, be expressive in our careers is something we're all kind of like learning in real time.
I do think there's a distinction, which is like we grew up believing that we were going to have the same outcomes or expectations as Gen X or boomers. And then you realized, okay,
Yeah.
inflation is quadrupled and all these things are not as sustainable or attainable that like we thought were going to happen. And so we had to reconcile with the lie. Whereas like Gen Z just never believed the myth. And so hard for us because we were like, oh yeah, if you work hard, I get this thing. I climb the next rung, I get to the next tier. And because I was such a grinder, I had to decouple my
Yeah.
identity with work, which was really hard, especially my first job. I was producing events at a very famous nightclub in New York, and it was a big famous nightclub. So everyone texted me all the time. Everyone wanted access. Like there was this real piece that I felt I was going to be of less value and service to the world if I changed jobs because I would have quote unquote less to offer, which I mean, I went to become a TV producer. It's not like there was.
Okay, you said something interesting. I wasn't sure. You said of less service to the world. This is an interesting one because I faced this too. I had a little bit of almost like at the intersection of like spirituality and capitalism where I got something in my head where it was like I think it conflated with purpose a little bit for me where it was like okay, as I leave Google and go into coaching, it's a calling. Like it's this bigger thing and I'm going to be of service to the world. And then of service meant like, oh, I need to coach more people so I'll be of more service so that I'll have more of an impact such that I'll be, living out my purpose in a bigger way. And I don't know if this was your experience, but this is what I took it to mean where I was kind of projecting onto this career and onto work what maybe spirituality or religion could have given me in another context. Does that make sense? Like that
Yeah.
new agey capitalism thing that happens sometimes?
Yeah. Well, as we spoke about this before we started recording, which is that Susie Welch, who's a author and she teaches a course at NYU, but she has a whole institute where she does all this data around people's values and living in your purpose. And so when you take this quiz, you figure out what your top 5 values are and what is the gap between your values and how much you're living them. And so everyone has different top 5, right? And we all possess all of them to some degree, but really our top 5 are what she qualifies as our North Star and how we want to live our lives. And so for me in that top 5, scale is important to me. It's in that top 5. So for me, when I think about being of service, that does matter to me. Does not matter to every person. And so that's where we have to be able to check ourselves and say, actually, like, what do I actually care about? What do I actually care about? And let me focus on me specifically and not what society is telling me my
Mhm,
version of success
mhm,
has to look
mhm.
like.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think service is important to me too. scale, not scale, but like
Yeah.
service.
But in my head, I'm like, you can be of service in so many ways. You could be the person who's giving me my coffee and you're just a delight to be around in the morning and you've set my whole day off with high vibes and energy that now I'm a better person all day because of your presence. And I think that is being of service just as much as someone who has a podcast that reaches millions of people. I think we have to expand our different depth what
Yes,
matters as a
definitely. I
society.
agree. I agree. And it's about choosing that and figuring that out. I talk about that in different words in one of the last chapters, which is around this notion of finding your ultimate concern. This notion that our goals naturally exist within hierarchies, and people who are the grittiest, meaning the people who are able to persevere and pursue a singular quote thing over a long period of time. It's not a job title necessarily, but it's a why, a purpose, a set of values, as you say. And so I think, part of healing the success wound, decoupling self worth from success, is figuring out what is the thing that you want to contribute to most that is almost like agnostic of job title or description, the thing that you would do even if you weren't making money for it in a way. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And so I just want to clarify everyone, these archetypes are all protecting the same pain. They're all different expressions of the same pain. And so you might be one or two, you might be multiple, you might just be one, but it's important to have the language for us to start to move out of it. I really love how clear you were with these archetypes. This is going to be very helpful for a lot of people to see themselves embodied in a persona versus just telling you what are the like attributes and traits. You'll be able to sort of feel your way
You got it.
into
Mm-hmm.
how this. I want to talk about capitalism for a second. Our other favorite topic is that we live in this world of deeply misaligned incentives where we are rewarded for our success food. We are rewarded for working harder, for sacrificing ourselves professionally. Startups glorify this, like, you don't take a salary. And we really romanticized this idea. And so, how do we work around that when we're being rewarded for essentially what is bad behavior for us, not good for us? So, how do I train my brain in a system that's telling me to do
Right.
this, but I know this is hurting me?
Yeah, there were two things that came out in my research when I was studying this that I thought were so interesting that really illuminate the cultural pull that this has on us. The first is this idea of workism, which I just kind of touched on, which is this idea that as religion has declined in our society, we now go to work to get our very human needs met of community, identity, transcendent connection to something greater than ourselves. We look for that at work now. We used to go to church or synagogue or to organized religion for that, but now we go to the workplace to find that. And this is such a great example of how our human need to search for something gets co-opted by our culture. And it gets kind of misused in a way and misaligned. And so we think we're going to these companies. This is why you get an experience of like somebody calling their work a family or calling their job
Right.
a calling. And I have this story, because having worked at Google, which is literally like we called ourselves Googlers. It was an identity, right? And I drank the Kool-Aid like by the gallon, but like the way that I'm drinking my, big right now, literally. And I loved it. A lot of people avoid the question, what do you do for work? I couldn't wait for somebody to ask me what I did for work. So I could pretty much just shove like my business card or my LinkedIn profile in their face because it was an excellent way for people to assign certain character traits to me, like hardworking, impressive, smart, interesting. Their eyes got a little big when I told them I worked for Google. Noted this was in like 2013, but still, like, there was a little bit of that allure to it. And so I not only overlooked, but participated in the toxic culture because I wanted to belong to this culture. And so I think it's a very human instinct to want us to give ourselves over to something greater than ourselves, whether it's a mission or a calling or a vocation, only for us to have this really rude awakening when the company or a job can never deliver you those
Yeah.
human needs.
That's a great answer.
Hmm.
What I also loved, I think it's the paradox of the whole thing, which we sort of touched on, is that this idea that actually when you're working from your true self, you can sustain longer. So this idea that we're so committed to the misaligned incentives and we're hurting ourselves through that process. It's like when we recalibrate and actually work from our true self with better boundaries, better clarity of vision, we produce more and we can sustain longer. And I think I always would sort of butt up against burnout because I had no boundaries. I was answering phone calls 11 p.m. every weekend, like I was just available 24/7 with a level of urgency that honestly, thank God we worked out of, okay?
Yeah.
Like it was bad. It was
Can
like I
imagine.
was available 1 second later, always available. Like there was no lapse between emails. It's still something that I'm like, why is this person taking forever to email back? Because it's so ingrained in me, this level of urgency from toxic workplace culture,
Mm.
where it was unacceptable to take 30 minutes to respond to an email. So that is a really important distinction to make. I would say maybe in the short term, I might have produced more back then, but I could never sustain it. Whereas now, because I can sustain it, I actually produce more. Does that make
It
sense?
does, it does. Yeah, I remember when I was, like, a few months into my aligned ambition experiment, when I was like, "Okay, I'm going to work from a place of creativity, regulation, inspiration, flow, my strengths, my values, more often than not." And I can break down all those tips a little bit later, but I was kind of, like, walking the walk and talking the talk. And to my great surprise, I got promoted, like, a year faster than I had received my previous promotion. I became a manager. I switched teams. I was able to get a different job. People kind of came up to me and were like, how are you doing this? You seem happy. There seems to be a change in you. Noted I was also getting sober at the time. So I finally was taking care of myself and investing in myself, not financially, but like from an energetic perspective and growing and changing. And I think that had a ripple effect. But I share this just to say, I didn't have this big breakdown just to leave and go coach other people. Like I really stayed where I was, stayed at Google for another 5 years. And we're like, how can I actually put these principles into practice exactly where I am, like in this space? And it works.
I want to make another distinction, which is you are living in your full genius now as like a coach and an author, but you implemented those principles while still being in a corporate environment, which it's important for everyone that doesn't want to be an entrepreneur or doesn't want to be a creative or they like their corporate job. They just want to make it work better for them. And you talk about in the book how real satisfaction really comes from where we're working from, not necessarily where we're working. But I just want to clarify that for people that are feeling a little bit like, okay, well, start your own business, but like, I don't want to do that. How do I find my way to more ease or fulfillment in my job or in my current company?
Yeah. Yes, I think the data is so interesting because 60% of people who come to me searching for a new job, desperate, get me out of this place, like I need some help. Those are the people who 60% of those people end up staying, not because
Yeah.
they were lazy or couldn't find a new job, but because they changed how they work. So, yes, fulfillment comes from the how, not the what. There's a lot more in the book, but I'll give you two. The first is to discover not just your strengths, but your zone of genius. Where almost like your gifts, your natural gifts and talents meet your experience. So what are a couple questions to ask that would get you into to help you identify your zone of genius are things like, what do I do naturally where time kind of expands and I'm able to enter into a state of flow? What do people usually come to me for? What am I known for? You could even ask a couple people on your team or even text that to loved ones. And then what did I do as a kid? What were things that I did as a kid that were natural kind of gifts of mine? For example, like in this career that I'm in now, I used to love to act and to like play pretend. And I used to love to help other people and sit with people and ask questions. And so that naturally lends itself to where I am now. So figuring out your zone of genius, and there's a survey and a lot of things that you can do in the book. And then the second would be figuring out what your core states of being are. Your core states of being are the feeling or the energy that you want to live in most often, more often than not. So if your values are of the mind, what you value the most, right? Like you were saying scale, I was saying service. A core state of being is, how does living in alignment with that value make you feel? Does it make you feel ablaze? Does it make you feel grounded? Does it make you feel radiant? Does it make you feel effervescent? What are those words that describe how you want to feel most of the time? And then we get to choose activities and things and conversations and people that create those feeling states, because internal states create almost like, what's the way of saying this? We need to shift the way that we are feeling on the inside in order to have external realities reflect that back to us.
I'm smiling also because in my workbook are those 3 exercises
Oh
literally.
my gosh, amazing. That goes to show you that they're the most powerful ones. It works.
But that's what's so crazy is that both of us in isolation came to the exact those 3 exercises, different than how Brooke has them in her book, but I completed my workbook, she did her book, we did those separate, and now we both have realized these are very vital ways to
Mhm.
recapture ourselves, our joy, to approach work from a healthier vantage point and also a more fulfilling vantage point. So that's just so crazy that you're saying that 'cause I was like, "Okay, well, love to see it.
But it also, it's
Love
like,
to see
I
it."
can't wait to get your workbook because no doubt we have different ways of describing it, different ways of leading people
Totally.
through it, and I think that that resonates with different brains, different backgrounds, all of that kind of thing.
Totally.
Mhm.
And I'm not a coach, so, like, that's I don't
Mm.
purport to be a coach, I just put the exercises that work for me, put them in a workbook, but I it's in my head, the workbook is an invitation to people like you. It's an invitation to go deeper with a professional,
Mm.
if you're curious, who can really then help you evolve what is what I believe a primer and an invitation and permission to ask more. Now, I wanna know if you've ever read The Dance of Anger.
No. Fabulous title.
Okay, great. Okay, this is fun. So, The Dance of Anger, the essential premise of this book is that when we start to work on ourselves and learn to set boundaries, we learn what is a new dance step and we have to get on the dance floor and do that new dance step. But our partner is probably going to try and pull us into the old dance step. And our job is to hold the boundary and keep dancing the new dance step. And eventually they will join us or they will get off the dance floor. And so when I think about this in terms of work, is that if I'm in a corporate environment in which has historically been more toxic, I really have fallen into these patterns and I'm coming back now with new tools. It's really hard sometimes to hold that new dance step or those boundaries. And it takes time because eventually people do shift, but there might be some discomfort initially when you go back to that work environment and say, I'm going to try and do this differently. Did you find that when you went back to Google and were evolving out of your work hard, play hard archetype?
Oh my god. Yes, I can feel that feeling, that dance of anger in my body right now. I called it a sweater that was too tight. Like in a 120-degree day with a sweater that's too tight on that you've outgrown, that's itchy. I was like, I just need to get this fucking thing off of me. Like that's how I felt, right? That I had outgrown or grown in a different way from this environment, but I still had to stay. I still had to stay because I wasn't in my next step. And I see that so often with people, right? Where it's like, I know this is no longer it for me, but I don't know what's next. People, you call it the messy middle, whatever, the dance figure. So that's the hardest part. And I think that's where I'm not trying to plug coaching, but genuinely like having a mentor or somebody who's been through it or having community or an accountability buddy or a friend or a coach or a therapist, whatever, like holding you through that period is so important. What are some things that I did that worked for me? I threw myself into figuring out what was next and creating an inspiring vision for that thing that could provide a sense of motivation for me to kind of keep up my own dance steps, so to speak. Like, why was I doing this? And that was that image for me was being a coach and being of service to people on a more human level, getting out of being in kind of, a big tech environment where people were talking about advertising technology all the time, which was something that I did not care about. I wanted to flip the table over at every single meeting. I was like, you think these are problems? Like, I'll show you problems, And then, for other of my clients, it's people have called it like, okay, if I'm trying to live in my aligned ambition, it's almost like I'm holding up a 2-pound weight. It's easy at first, but the force of
Yeah.
gravity, the force of the prevailing culture wants to pull it down. And so that's when it's really kind of finding that ultimate concern, that why, that inspiring vision as to why you're this way is the one thing. And for others, it might be changing jobs too, because if it's just incongruent, then that's a good sign that it's time to move on to.
That's really helpful, really powerful. You shared this thing that blew my mind in the book. This is one of my new favorite data stats that I've been
Mm.
touting around town. So you talk about Robert Keegan, who's a developmental psychologist, and he shares that 65% of us stay stuck in a stage of development called the socialized mind, where one sense of self is heavily influenced by external factors. 65% of us. This is bananas to me. Only 35% of adults reach the self authoring mind, where they feel a sense of self, agency, and define their identity through their own values. And this is like such an opportunity to me to say, okay, if we can help people, like my goal is everyone feels a sense of agency over their own lives. They feel like they're living in their zone of genius, contributing to the culture. I believe the world will inherently be more harmonious and peaceful if we can get there. And I'd never heard data like that.
Mm.
I never even knew that's what we were dealing with from a population demographic state.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that, because that's one of my favorite, and that's one of my favorite points too, is this idea that adults, like children, have stages of development. If you've ever seen a baby, pediatricians will track their stage of development. Are they crawling? Are they walking? Are they pulling up? Are they kicking a ball? Like, those are stages of development. We don't stop developing all the way until we pass on. And of stages, there are these 2 to 3 that are most impactful. There's the socialized mind, where we define, like you said, define ourselves according to our relationships and our accomplishments and the things around us. Like, I'm a good mother because my kids tell me I am, or I'm a good sister because I always show up, on time, or I am a good worker because I got a great performance review. We're defining ourselves according to these extrinsic things. If we were to advance and kind of to move up in terms of a stage of consciousness or development, that sounds like I am me. I am the author of my life. I can make decisions that are good to me. And that's really the leap from success wound to aligned ambition. Now, there's one more stage that I didn't talk about in the book, and I kind of regret. And that's that this is only 5% of adults get to this final level, the enlightened mind. This is the person who lives in the paradox of just like, I am. Not I am me and I create my own life, but I am. I am everything and I am nothing. I exist beyond any of these limitations or constraints or even my values. It's almost like, what are values? That's like our Eckhart Tolles of the world. But I think there's that element. Maybe that's where our consciousness is going, right? There's been so much emphasis, even on the collective, around like your values and start with you and this is your life and like all this kind of understanding. I wonder if the next evolution is going to be, okay, how do we transcend this so that we break down barriers even further between us, if that makes sense?
I would love that, but I think 65% of us are still trying just to get to the
That's right.
self-authoring mind. We have a lot of work to
We
do.
do.
But this is the hill I want to die on, is that emotional work is essential to our career growth, because I truly believe the more that we know ourselves, our motivations, which are usually childhood limiting beliefs, the more we can unravel those, the more we can get to the self-authorship mind, because you meet so many people in your life, whether it's at work, someone you've dated, that trauma is driving their car, right? Like they're in the passenger seat of their own life, and their trauma and their wounding is making decisions for them. They watch it happening and they're like, why am I reacting this way? I don't want to be this person. That's so much of what the success wound is us reacting from hurts from childhood, that if we can move out of our own way and we start driving the car, life becomes easier to navigate because you have more control, right? You have more agency. And
Mm-hmm.
that's really the point.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think we all, not all of us, but so many of us, and probably many people who are listening to this, know that like emotional regulation is important. Being aware of our emotions is important, but that all tends to get thrown out the window in a work context. As soon as we log onto our computer, or as soon as we're in a work meeting, or we walk into the office, all ideas seem to go out the window. I know that was the case for me, at least. And I'm not talking about regulation from a point of like pushing down your feelings. I'm talking about noticing when your boss says you're missing the mark in some way, or when you open your inbox and you get a scathing email, or somebody's disappointed in you, or things didn't go the way that they wanted. Where do you feel that in your body? Where do you feel that in your body? Does it have a color, a texture, a shape? Can you ask that feeling a question? Can you understand what that feeling is trying to tell you, what it's trying to protect you from? That's real regulation. And so that's almost like what I write about as being important in in a work context, is having that level. You don't have to do that like in the meeting, but can you do that
Yeah.
later that day instead of shoving it down and moving on, or saying, oh, that's just how work is? Can you pay attention to what's being activated? Because that might be the thing that's holding you back in your career, is not knowing that these emotions are trying to tell you something and then not extracting the wisdom available from them.
Totally. And like back pre-therapy, back before any of this, if you had been telling me this, Brooke, I would have been like, "Girl, no
Yeah.
thanks. I'm not sitting feeling anything."
Yeah.
I was the grinder. We're not meditating. Are you nuts?
No
And
time.
so what I want to say, 'cause I was explaining healthy ambition to a friend of mine who's had a long storied corporate career. And she was like, "I have no idea what you're talking about." She's like, "This sounds like a foreign language." And I said, "You know what? Fair. That is a fair piece of feedback because I probably would have said the same thing 10
Mm.
years ago."
Hmm.
And I said, "But I'm just gonna ask you to do the exercise." I'm like, "Buy this book, do this thing, and just, like, see what it reveals." She's like, "I'm afraid." And I was like, "That's the answer. You're afraid, you should definitely investigate. Why does the idea of healthier ambition scare you? What are you so afraid of on the other side?" Is that and, for a lot of people I know, the response to that question is that my dreams won't be as big.
I won't make it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my answer is, then they weren't your real dreams anyways.
Mm. Mm.
Why do the dreams have to be huge for them to matter?
Mm.
What I realized as I got healthier with my ambition is that the scale of my dreams didn't change. The relationship to my work changed, which made the work more enjoyable. I still want big things. I still want to achieve big things. Has it diminished a little bit from like a psychopathic level of like bigness? Yes. But
Mhm.
like, thank God.
Mhm.
For me, that was the big takeaway. It wasn't like I became less ambitious.
Right.
I have friends all the time, they're like, "You're still doing all this?" And I'm like,
Mm.
"Yes," because I love it. I love it. It gives me fulfills something in me. Just for people that are feeling reticent around, some reflection or slowness, I think it's important to investigate our resistance.
Mm. That's so true. That's probably the same hesitation people have, or I hear women have, around having kids. Like, what is this going to
Mhm.
do to my ambition? What is this going to do to my work life? Is this going to make my dreams less big? Am I going to make it? Am I actually going to get to that goal? And to your point, I wonder if the fear isn't that their dreams are going to be less big. It's that they won't know who they are or what their worth is without them.
Interesting.
You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Mhm. It's more identity related
I
necessarily
think
than
so.
anything
I
else.
think so. Mhm.
And we had a neuroscientist on an earlier episode of the podcast, and what we've learned is that most people wait for clarity to move, and we actually get clarity from movement, which I think you talk about in your book too.
Yeah. Yeah. This is specifically helpful for the hider person, the person who harbors bigger dreams, or who keeps saying, after this busy season, then I'll start my side hustle, or after I have my third baby and go on maternity leave, then I'll finally consider, leaving. They're waiting for inspiration to strike. They're waiting for a diagnosis or something that's going to almost like force them into action. When readiness is a choice, it's a decision to take the first step, and the readiness comes afterwards. I actually just wrote about this in a People magazine op-ed that's coming out, and it was what sobriety taught me about motherhood. And it's this idea that I wasn't ready. I was not ready to get sober. I was 24. I was single. I was living in New York. Things were good. Like, things were not good on the inside, but it was like, I was like, what, I'm going to stop drinking now? Like, I still have a couple good years left in me. But the truth is, I had a vision for what my life could be like without alcohol. And so I decided to be ready in that moment. And the same thing, I had a vision for my family. So I decided to be ready to start having kids, even though I didn't feel ready. I didn't have that white light experience. Same thing for your career. You'll never feel ready, especially if you're more of a hider type. It's that clarity and that readiness from making a decision.
What I always try and remember is like no decisions we're making are permanent or binary.
True.
Like we're allowed to change our minds. We're allowed to try something and decide we don't like it. And we're also caught up on putting so much weight on every decision we make.
Mhm.
And the lighter I got with my touch and everything that I did, the more fun I started having.
This might be really helpful for the seeker who's like, I need to find that, again, that one thing, right? The one thing. And if you had a lighter touch and you were like, no decisions are permanent, it took the pressure off of anything that you were pursuing and allowed you to have fun and be more creative. I love that idea.
Yeah. This was so fun.
Thank you.
What a
Me
delight to
too.
dig into with you.
Thank you for pulling out these specific. I think you're one of the first people who's like read my words back to me. That's very surreal. So thank you for giving me that dream come true moment. I appreciate it.
Well, I thought they were worth pulling out, so
Thanks.
I really enjoyed it, and, I rarely quote actually the author directly, I usually just build questions around the themes,
Mm,
but there was a lot of really interesting science and research that I wanted to bring to the audience, so hopefully, we're encouraging you to buy the book, but if you don't, hopefully you got some good takeaways,
totally.
but just, like, things that really left me thinking beyond my session with your work,
Mm,
which is always the mark of a good book, is that you're thinking about it later. And one of my favorite things you said at the end of the book was, if you want to go big, you have to go deep.
mm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I want to leave the audience with that.
True. Yeah. Even when you said this, the image I always get is like an oak tree, right? Like the bigger you want to go, the deeper your roots have to be. And I think that's also the power of alignment as you talk about it, like that feeling like deeply rooted in yourself and your intention and your values and your strength. It's like that's what allows for that bigness. And I so true. Thank you.
Brooke, please tell them where they find you, where they can buy the book.
You can get the book anywhere books are sold, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, your local bookstore. You can follow me, Brooke V. Taylor, on Instagram. And if you go to brooketaylorcoaching.com/book, you'll get all the freebies from the book. All the exercises that we talked about are on a digital version of that, if that's something you want.
Thank you so much for listening. If you do like listening, it would mean the world to us if you could subscribe or review the podcast anywhere that you watch or listen to the podcast. It really helps with the algorithm to share this with the world. I want to give a special thank you to young Spielberg and Sarah Yarkin for their beautiful work on our opening jingle, Dana Boulos for her help with the beautiful art, and to all of you for tuning in and keeping this dream alive. If you want to hear certain topics or from certain guests, please feel free to email us. We really, really want to hear from you and see how we can best support you. See you next time.